Hello and welcome to another episode of 7th Tier Podcast, a weekly Storybook Brawl podcast focused on strategy and high-level play. My name is Jethro, and I'm joined this week and every week by your friend and mine, the best Storybook Brawl player currently live on Twitch. It's Sythesys. Syth, how's it going?
Yeah, it's good. I'm excited to be recording this live. It's definitely exciting. We'll see how it goes for the future. We've definitely had some tech issues already. I wouldn't be surprised if there are more tech issues to come. But yeah, it's good.
Yes, so for listeners at home in the future times, hello. You're very welcome, of course, but we are now recording the shows live through Twitch. So if you're available at midday on a Monday, UTC, you can tune in on Syth's Twitch and you get both your regular content, the recordings, and also all of the stuff that I edit out. So tune in for a marginally worse experience. So that's what's different this week. What's the same this week is that we're kicking things off with our stats from the I was going to say from the last 7 days, but actually this is since the patch, so it's like the last 6 days.
Yeah.
Or so. It was a bit of a weird one, this patch. All of the queues broke for a couple of days last week. There were a lot of bots in some of your games on stream.
Yeah, for sure.
So I've only managed to make the very embarrassing 16 games, including 14 top 4s, only 2 bottom 4s, 4 crowns for an average finish of 3.0, which is actually my best, so maybe I should play less.
My stats, of course, have now changed since I added them to the show notes, but I will include the game I just played. So I have played 15 games with an average placement of 2.93, 5 crowns, and 13 top 4s. Yeah, I love playing on a new patch. I'm excited to see how everything has shaken out. I have been picking the new heroes over basically everything. The only heroes that I've played more than once are King Midas and Sadrak, because they've seen significant changes. So I don't think there's too much data to extract from my notes, other than I've done really well with King Midas, an average placement of 2.25 with 2 crowns. As a new hero, that's a really good showing for a hero that could be really strong.
Agreed, that doesn't line up with my experience of King Midas at all, but I've only played him once or twice. So that brings us to our main topic for today, because last time we overran on this topic. We're going through every one of the patch changes that came in last week, and what are our first impressions? What do we think this is going to do to the ladder, to the tournament early next year? And what are we excited to get stuck into?
So, to kick us off, let's talk about the brand new heroes. We've got 3 new heroes and a reworked hero this patch. So, a couple of, some really exciting things going on there. I always love to see new heroes. They can often offer some very different strategies, and some of the most interesting bits of the game are figuring out how to evaluate what is different from basic gameplay when playing as a new hero.
Agreed, it's the first decision you have every game, is which of these heroes am I going to play, and that dictates the next 30 decisions you're going to make.
So the first hero we've got up is Sharebear. Sharebear's hero power is, after each brawl, you and your last opponent gain +1 gold.
So Sharebear, what I've noticed is that this plays out very similarly to the Cursed King. You're getting +1 gold each turn. That's the main upside of this hero.
Yeah, absolutely. And the downsides are both pretty minimal, and it's worth talking about this, because we talked about this in our economy episode last week, but giving your opponents gold is not that bad. Your opponents don't have control over which turns they're getting the gold. Getting +1... Facing against Sharebear turn 1 feels amazing. You're going to get extra gold on the 3 gold turn, you're going to get to buy a second unit. That's great. That feels amazing.
That's the turn where +1 gold is the most important.
Yeah, and the Sharebear you're facing hasn't gained any advantage from their hero power yet, because you don't get that extra gold on turn 1, unlike my Cursed King. So that's the dream, is you face Sharebear on turn 1, but as Sharebear, giving that money away doesn't make a huge difference. It definitely raises the overall power of the lobby a little bit, but you're still getting much more benefit than everyone else, and you're not going to face the person you just gave gold to for at least a couple of turns. So you can, it doesn't really matter that you've made someone else strong throughout turn 2, tier 2, because you're not going to face them again during that period. And by the time you do face them, that small economy bonus has probably tailed off, unless they've been able to snowball it.
We discussed last week that actually that can be somewhat of an advantage, making the enemy of 6 of your shared enemies slightly stronger. They're going to be dealing more damage to people on that second turn of the game. Obviously, as Sharebear, you're sharing it with everyone eventually.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's an interesting hero. I think my gut instinct is that they're a little bit better than Cursed King. In general, I would rather bring a bunch of people up and be strong than sometimes deal 6 damage to myself because the spells that I've been offered don't line up with the minions that I'm playing. I also like the ability to spend my money on minions, the things I want to spend it on, especially on turn 2. I really want to buy minion. As Curse King, minion lose 3 life is a much higher cost. I hate that. Curse King does have that extra power on turn 1. I can't deny you are down 1 total gold as Sharebear relative to Curse King. But I think on the whole, I'm leaning a little bit in Sharebear's favour, but it's close.
I mean, you're down 1 random spell. Like, what are you spending that gold on turn 1 as Cursed King?
It's +1/+1 on average, right? And that's meaningful, but not backbreaking.
I don't know what on average means in that context. Like, it could be a spinning gold or a...
Most of them are +1. There's 3 or 4 that are like if it's eeny meeny, it's +1/+1. If it's +1 to a good unit, if it's +1 to an evil unit, if it's +1 and maybe you win the fight. So 4 of the 10 spells are +1/+1.
But eeny meeny, that's not because of your hero power. Your hero power only gave you a 50% higher shot at hitting the one you wanted.
It lets you buy sell. Like, that's not nothing.
Well, no, it's 17%. It's the difference between 1 in 3 that you hit the one you wanted, assuming there's only one you want, right? And 50% for the one you wanted.
If there's a chicken, it gets you a guaranteed. But...
Yes. And there might be 2 that you want and 1 that you really don't. There's a lot of different shops you can be offered on turn 1. But Cursed King doesn't really have a very powerful hero power on turn 1 anyway.
No, I'm not saying that for sure.
Though I'll give you it is better than Sharebear's, obviously. I'm really excited by Sharebear. I think I like Cursed King. I don't like how similarly Cursed King plays to Loki in that you're playing these random spells. I think spending that gold on minions also lets you invest it, right? It lets you buy extra chickens, fill up your hand going into the next turn so that you can spend that gold where it's useful. Where Midas, you're constantly needing to spend that gold right now, and there's not always a way to spend it that's profitable to you long term. So Sharebear I'm really excited for.
Next up, we've got Sphinx, the Sphinx. So their hero power is your shop sells an extra spell, a lot like Potion Master, and when you level up, your spells are free this round. So there's a few nuances to point out here. First, those spells don't stay free if you lock them. I think that's a mistake that I think a lot of people are going to make the first time they play this hero. I certainly would have if I hadn't been told ahead of time. Don't lock free spells thinking that's good. Do think about locking spells going into that turn. If you lock an expensive spell, it will be free next turn, and that's pretty good. So mostly this hero power is about XP spells. The goal is to cast a 4 or 5 cost spell, and when you do that, you get to be really, really strong. The dream is you do that on 3.0. You are offered in your first shop on 3.0 a Make-A-Wish, and you get to be unbelievably ahead of the whole lobby. That is definitely a thing that can happen, and is kind of terrifying. You should probably be a little more open to even rolling on that turn to find that high roll, because it is a hell of a high roll when it happens. But I've had a few other interactions that were good. I've had Gingerbread House on that turn, and that felt really good. Like, that was like finding a tier 2 treasure for 0 cost on that turn. And at that point, I'm basically the equivalent of Mrs. Claus or Krampus in that my units are going to have +1 for the whole game. That felt really, really good.
We've discussed before that when Loki hits a Gingerbread House on that turn, you feel busted. And here you don't have the downside that you don't have control over your spells for the next few turns.
True Love's Kiss also stands out as one that buy a 3-drop, make it a 4-drop, random 4-drop on 3.0 is going to win you a ton of fights. Almost all of the 4-drops are way above stats.
I mean, I've put effort into flipping a poly on that turn, right? That's all you're getting is a random 4.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, a few of them aren't incredible, but on average, you should be very happy with that. And yeah, I think Sphinx has a lot of potential for a lot of strength. The Potion Master hero power of seeing 2 spells alone is relatively strong.
And that doubles the chances that you're seeing one of these super relevant expensive spells as well. Like, you're talking about rolling for them.
Yes.
And you get those couple of rolls with every 1 gold that you spend.
Yeah. The difficult turns are things like 3.2 and 4.2, where if you're offered an XP spell, buying it kind of sucks, because getting your free spells after you've cast a spell in the middle of a turn is super awkward, and having to lock it can be pretty awkward with how shops play out. It can be a little clunky at times, but on the whole, I like Sphinx. I don't think they're going to be crazy strong. I expect they're the weakest of the new heroes, but I think they've got a lot of potential for high rolling, and if you're fighting a Sphinx, check their level. because they could be way ahead in XP.
Yeah, Sphinxes can run away with lobbies. You see them at the top and you're scared to face them because they're level 5 and you're level 4.1.
Yeah.
I was super wrong about Sphinx on reading them. Like, I assumed that Sphinx was going to play out as this super weird hatball hero where it was all about getting Crystal Ball and ways to pay off your spells, and then you get these 5 strange free turns through the game where you have a hat. You want to get to those high tiers of play and cast Drink Me potions, because the higher the tier, the more value you're getting from those spells. Once you're casting Knighthoods and Croc Baits, you're getting just 20 or more extra mana. That was how I pictured it. The way I've seen it play out on your stream and in my lobbies is that the Sphinxes skip without a downside.
Yeah, that is certainly how I've been playing it. I think if you do get that early Crystal Ball, it's great. But as we've seen on some other Crystal Ball-esque heroes in the past, like Potion Master, trying to brute force Crystal Ball without a hero pad that makes it easier to assemble is a crapshoot. And especially given that you're on a clock to do it, because if you don't get it by 4.0, you're only getting it on 5.0 and 6, and that's asking a lot. I think, realistically, if it falls into your lap off a Brave Princess, great, but don't worry too much about it for the most part.
Yeah, I just certainly don't think it's a hero where you want to be like, oh, I'll buy an Animal Familiar on 1 because I'm going to be casting way more spells this game. You're only really going to be casting 1 spell on those 5 turns.
Yeah, so that's the Sphinx. Next up, we have King Midas. This is my favourite of the new heroes. King Midas, you only need 2 copies to upgrade a character, but you can never find treasures. So again, there's a few hidden things baked into this hero power. The first of which is that you can never see quest characters. They are straight removed from the shop. So that's Cinderella, Brave Princess, Princess White, Nutcracker, Lancelot, and Hercules all cannot appear in your shops. And that's pretty meaningful. That is a lot of units that you would normally expect to see.
And some of the better units as well, right? Like,
yeah, for sure. It also changes the relative power of some other units. King Arthur gets a lot worse because you can't find a tier 6 prince or princess. Lonely Prince is a lot worse when half of the tier 2 princesses are gone, and so are half of the tier 3 princesses. You're much less likely to flip those frogs.
Heartwood Elder's worse when all of the tier 4 trees are gone.
I mean, that is also true. There's no Nutcracker and Broccoli's have been removed, so yeah. What would normally have been certainly going into King Midas, my default expectation was going to be, I'm going to look for these tier 4 scaling units. Heartwood Elder and Prince Arthur are going to be my defaults. And they haven't been there. What I have found is that I do still want Heartwood Elders. I can find more copies of Heartwood Elder, or certainly Happy Little Trees are a unit that I'm often looking for on tier 2. It's still a plan, but it's much less consistent than it was in my head, where I was like, cool, I'm going to get Golden Heartwood Elder and have massive trees, and that's the default play pattern. That just wasn't the case.
You want your hero power to feel like Gwen's with upside, right? We want to say, these are the ones that we would want to knight. Instead of spending our knighthood on them, we're finding one other copy, and it's scaling us a ton. It's interesting you said Arthur is still bad. I saw an Arthur game on your stream that looked really strong.
I didn't finish well in that, I don't think. Or maybe I did and I came like 3rd or something. I think what happened in that game was that I took Frog Princes without realising they were bad, got lucky on the Sherwood Sure Shot triple, so flipped my frogs and had Princess triple. So when I bought the Arthurs, I already had 2 Golden Prince Royals, which was definitely not the norm you would expect when you're offered so few of them. Like, I got there without thinking about the consequences. I think that might still be good. Like, I'm still probably going to take Arthurs on 4.0 if I'm lacking direction. I think even a Golden Arthur on its own is a 12/12 that gets +4/+4 return. That's a big unit. I'm going to run it. I wouldn't necessarily pivot all in on that in the way that I did in that game and happened to get there.
So that's what's not as good as we expected on King Midas. What is better than we expected? What do we actually want to do to get the most out of this hero?
Mostly what's better than expected is just how strong you are in the mid-game. Your tier 3 and tier 4, you just have a ridiculous amount of stats. Normally when you triple a unit, you are down total stats, because you're getting double the unit's base stats, but you've spent the gold on 3 copies of that unit. And you're hoping that the treasure makes up for that to some extent. But treasures don't actually provide a ridiculous amount of stats, especially in the early game. Like, tier 2 treasures often don't affect your board very much at all. And tier 3 treasures do, but they're, on average, like, a 7/7 of stats or less. Like, they're not a massive increase in power. And just having 4 golden units by 4.0 is completely reasonable as Midas. You're very, very strong. You're dealing a ton of damage to people, and you are kind of dominating a lobby pretty consistently in my experience. I've played 4 games, top 4 every time. That has been... I had some rough starts. You can definitely, not be offered some triples and just buying random units that you don't have a hero power, but you're likely to be offered some pairs that can very rapidly transition into you. And sometimes you can have insane economy. That one game in particular, I had an early golden greedy
Nice.
in front of a golden lady of the lake on 4.1. And I had 24 gold for the next 6 turns. Yeah, I won that lobby. There is a lot of ways that you can get way... I've had 2 golden pigs in another game. You can have ridiculous amount of money and a ridiculous amount of mid-game strength, dealing a ton of damage to opponents. I think for tournaments in particular, that mid-game strength is going to be crazy, and I expect that they are at least A tier for tournament play. Ladder's a little worse, because it is harder to turn mid-game strength into first place, because this is the downside of this hero power. Late-game comps that win the game without any hero powers are harder to assemble.
Without any treasures, yeah.
Without any treasures, yes. So the thing is, you don't have any treasures, and a lot of the late-game comps are very treasure-reliant. Bearstein, Pumpkin, these are totally reasonable, good late-game comps that you should often be aware of, but they need some stats from treasures. They really love a Monkey's Paw. They even love a Ring of Rage or whatever, because they get to double, triple down on those stat increases. Even a Sting can be crazy for a Bearstein comp, right?
Yeah.
And you just don't have access to those treasures.
Doubling a 2-2 is so much smaller than doubling a 12-2.
Indeed. So what you need to find is the late game comps that don't rely on that. And there's 2 main ones that stand out. The first is this trees thing. If you've had an early happy little tree, you found some Heartwood Elders, you then pick up Shoulder Fairies, Echo Woods. These can eat golden Shoulder Fairies and golden Echo Woods are just massive units a lot of the time, and that can be enough for you to beat a lot of the late game comps. You won't beat someone who's been tier 6 for a lot of time, but you are dealing a lot of damage to the lobby. Hopefully you can win before that. I think that's a totally reasonable late game strategy. And then the other one is the classic late game strategy if you don't have any treasures. This is always, if I get to tier 6, I don't have any treasures, the comp I'm looking for, it's Copycat Good Boy. It's very easy to assemble golden copycats, it's easier than normal to assemble golden good boys, and it only takes 1 or 2 buff spells for, honestly, vanilla, unbuffed golden copycat, golden good boy. When that copycat attacks, it's giving your whole comp, plus 36 plus 36 or something? It's huge.
4 redoubled twice.
32, I think it's 8 times. But yes, it's crazy how many extra stats you can get without any buff spells at all. And then if you find those, it's great. You can also try and dream out of Midas. I had one game where I dreamed out of Midas into Morgan Le Fay, instantly found a tier 6 treasure.
Oh,
and
that's nice.
That was insane. But that is one thing you can do, is get a bunch of golden units and then turn into a hero that can get a treasure and then try and triple something. That's asking a lot.
It sounds like Morgan is the best case there, because the few times I've got there as King Midas, I've dreamed out into a sad Drac and then lost the next fight.
Yeah, that can happen for sure. But dreaming out is an option worth being on your radar, I guess. Yeah, otherwise, so I think Midas is probably going to end up a little like Peter Pants, where they can come second very consistently, and coming first will require the lobby to cooperate either in killing themselves so the game ends quickly, or you manage to be more powerful than them. You get the double golden copycat good boy stuff that I've had. Also, and one other avenue for late game strength is golden polywoggles. Now that Grimsoul is back, golden polywoggles very easy to assemble, relatively easy to flip. Certainly I had I think it was maybe from a kiss or something, but I've had a golden good boy on tier 4. That must have been from a polywoggle into a kiss. But yeah, get that. You win those games. It's not very hard. Yeah.
I mean, that's why we talk about Waddle as a character you don't necessarily dream out of, right? It's because your polywoggles can do so much work in the late game.
When we get to the Grimsoul section, I'm going to talk a lot about Wonder Waddle. Yeah, it's a really good thing.
Final question I had, we touched upon quest units not being available to you in the shop, and that locks you out of a bunch of things. What happens if you kidnap a quest unit or acquire one elsewise? Can we sneak a treasure into Midas?
No, they have a quest. They can complete that quest. They will upgrade when they do so, and you will gain no treasures.
Gross.
So it doesn't feel great. It's relatively difficult to steal. I guess you have to cast the spell Kidnap because you can't get Gloves of Thieving. But yeah, it's not as exciting as you might hope, for sure.
Is there ever an occasion you can imagine dreaming into King Midas?
Oh, yeah, if you already had a reasonable set of treasures and a couple of pairs in your hand, that seems completely reasonable.
And I think Copy Boy is the strategy that accelerates up the most, like the exponential growth you get from going from regular to golden. Pumpkins, you get a lot from a pumpkin going from regular to golden, that's true. But all your other units, they're just some evil guys. What does it mean if a dragon's golden? It's a bit bigger. But getting the golden copycat and the golden good boy, or the 2 golden copycats, so you've got a spare. And your treasures are full. You've been playing as Waddle for the rest of the game.
Yeah. If you've got, I think Midas would be a totally fine. It's a really good, like, triple of 6-drop units is one of the stronger things you can do, and yeah, they don't need the 6-drop treasure to come with them necessarily.
So that's King Midas. Our final new hero isn't really a new hero at all, but it's new that we get to talk about them again. This is Sad Drak. Who now says that in addition to your first character having Slay for +2 permanent attack, you get the first attack every single brawl. This is the treasure Hermes Boots, for those of you familiar, but it's not taking up a treasure slot. And you always, in those first brawls now, you get that first attack, and that's going to mean more often than not you're getting that first Slay, and you can begin that snowball rolling. How have you found Sad Drak?
So one thing to mention there, the hero power did used to give +3/+0, so they do have a little less inbuilt scaling, which does matter for if you are trying. Certainly Wall Drak, I think, is probably worse. Like, if you're trying to have 1 unit in slot 1 and then a bunch of 0 power units alongside it, that's been not the best for a while, but I think it's even worse than before, because previously the joke was that you had something with hundreds of power, and that's going to take a lot longer to get going.
I think it still needs Bad Moon, and it always has, is my perspective on Wall Drak.
I mean, that's probably true. But the Shadow Assassin got worse, so there's no way it's good. But what it does do is make things like turn 1 Sure Shot, which was previously a 50-50, whether it got the Slay, 100% almost. Not quite. They might have a unicorn, they might have an egg. Sometimes you get got. But you're way more likely to get those things going, and once you get it going, it gets to do it again and again and again and again, especially on a ranged unit. I think it's a really strong increase, and it means that Sad Drak has some late game power. Previously, the stats on that meant very little going forward, and in order to make good use of it, you needed to be finding Slay synergies, whether that was Bad Moon or Bounty Board or some other synergy-based things, rather than just using the stats itself. Now, late game Hermes Boots is incredible. People often joke that it's a tier 6 treasure that is somehow in tier 2. I have skipped tier 6 treasures because I had Hermes Boots, and it was more important that I attacked first in those fights. Some comps, Copy Boy in particular, is extremely reliant on having the unit in slot 1 attack, and so are some other, like a lot of Slay comps, if you're still playing those, or any unit with a big ranged unit in slot 1 massively benefits from having the ability to attack first. Doom Breath in slot 1 in particular definitely stands out as so much better when you're consistently attacking first.
Gives any of their backline a 50% chance that it just dies once you've got that 100 attack Doom Breath sat there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a question about Hermes Boots. So, as we talked about in our Copy Boy episode, Hermes Boots is actually a great sort of counter strat towards the late game, partly because you get those dragons and other things, and partly because if you know other people are on Copy Boy, you've got to maximise your chances of that 1 in 8, getting it down to a 1 in 4. Obviously, Hermes Boots, if you both have one, then it just goes back to being a coin flip. If you're Sad Drak and your opponent has a Hermes Boots, I assume that's a coin flip, or is it always them?
Yep, yeah, that's a coin flip.
And if we both have Hermes Boots, but one of us is Sad Drak?
I don't know if Sad Drak can be offered Hermes Boots. That is an interaction I haven't tested yet.
Loki can be offered Crystal Ball.
That's true. But Beauty can't be offered Corrupted Heartwood. I don't know. We'll have to see. But in that case, Sad Drak would go first, and Sad Drak would go second, or every time against Celestial Tiger with Boots. It's a +1 to the priority. If you're even in priority, it's a 50-50, and that interaction plays out as it would with other people having a copy of Hermes Boots. Yeah, I think that otherwise Sad Drak should be fine. Hermes Boots is really powerful. It's definitely not a lot of early stats. You can still get in those board positions where you face some people with early eggs, you miss your first 3 slays, and then it's really hard to get the ball rolling. But I think solid middling hero with a lot of late game potential with a built-in Hermes Boots.
I'm really excited to try out this new Sad Drak. I think that's a really novel and potentially really powerful addition to their hero power. We have one final new addition, or I should say returning addition to the game, and this is Grimsoul. This went away last patch in the Great Purging of the Slay comp, and it's back. This is the tier 4 character. It's a monster, it's a 5/1, and it has Last Breath. Trigger a slay ability of one of your characters. We could dedicate a whole episode to Grimsoul.
We could. I think, for the most part, Slay in general as a comp is still gutted enough that you're not going to be doing the things you used to be doing with Grimsoul a decent amount of the time, where your front row would be something like Grimsoul, Chupacabra, Grimsoul, Golden Grimsoul, something like that. Go really hard on just triggering one unit Slay over and over and over again, getting a ton of scaling. Because you're not health scaling anymore, and there are diminishing return. There's significant diminishing returns on just scaling power. I do think mostly what you're going to get out of Grimsoul being back is the side abilities that Grimsoul had. Flipping a Polywoggle on during tier 5 to get an early 6-drop was a play that you should be very aware of and should definitely consider, especially on heroes like Wonder Waddle, who can have plenty of golden Polywoggles. That used to be a lot of the late game strength of Wonder Waddle, is that you would have this early game power spike, and then your late game power spike was your hand is 2 golden Polywoggles and a Grimsoul. You spend a couple of fights putting that in, and you have 2 golden 6-drops. You'll find a direction from there.
It's worth being careful that I have been got before by forgetting that Lancelot had a slay.
Yeah, do be careful. Brave Princess stealing slay triggers can happen. Do be aware of that sort of thing for sure.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the other thing you could do with Grimsoul is be Trophy Hunter. Trophy Hunter was a hero that was relegated to... I had them second worst hero in the game. They were absolutely unplayable on the last patch because their whole comp relied on using Grimsoul to trigger either Friendly Spirit or Good Boy to get integer cap levels of stats. 10 digits. Unbelievable how large you could get. I have already been part of a game where that has happened. I have seen actual integer cap Good Boys. It happens.
Ouch.
It's real. It's you can get some very, very big units. I think Trophy Hunter is back, and with Slay being dead, Grimsoul is going to be less contested. I think Trophy Hunter might be in a really good place. Previously, in the Slay meta, when Chupacabra was the best tier 4 unit or whatever, Trophy Hunter was struggling a little bit because they wanted the Grimsouls and so did everyone else. Now, I think Grimsouls are going to be a lot less contested. If you were trying to flip a poly, you only want one. Don't even need to pick up a pair. So yeah, I think Trophy Hunter could be in a really good place.
That's really interesting. The single unit change can take that hero all the way from F tier right up to B or A tier. Where are they on your tier list right now?
I had them in B tier speculatively. I think they could be really strong. The late game potential is obscene, and the addition of Mummy on tier 3 is enough that I'm super interested.
There's been a couple of nerfs this patch. A couple of things that were considered too good. One of them was Copycat, but this isn't much of a nerf. They've taken it from a 212 down to just being a 2-8. Which is still more toughness than it had previously. I think it was a 4-4 previously.
Yes, back a few patches ago, it was just a 4-4. Overall, what this does is discourage the blind pivot into Copycat. We mentioned in our Copycat episode that one of the strengths of Copycat was that if you put it in front of a Mim, a 512 or similar, a 512 was just a unit that could brawl, and you didn't need to worry. Like, you could just take it as a unit with some pretty good stats and be happy with it during tier 4, and that because it led to one of the strongest late game comps, that was just a good thing to be doing. So it's much worse in that role. If you take it without any death rattles, it's now an actively bad unit. I don't want a 2-8. Yes. That's bad.
2-8 is too small.
However, the amount of stats it generates and stuff, it's still going to get the job done later. It does make it easier to have it so that your first unit, you should think more about that breakpoint more. It is actually fairly easy to make sure that your unit in slot 1 has 8 power, enough to kill a Copycat. Surprisingly often you would get late game battles where someone's slot 1 unit, for whatever reason, maybe it was a baby bear, or maybe it was a Grimsoul or something, a unit that just didn't happen to kill a 212, giving them 0 chance of ever beating you. Or like a Siren or something, a unit that's totally fine to put in slot 1, didn't kill a Copycat, and so they didn't even have the 1 in 8 that they can snipe your Copycat to win the fight. With that being gone, and the fact that when it's a golden Copycat, it only has 16 toughness, which is a lot less than the 20/20 stats that you often have by that stage of the game, you are more likely to be able to consistently if you get the 1 and 8, actually win the fight. I don't think otherwise the comp is not gutted. This is a good change that pushes it in the right direction without making it an inviable strategy. I like it.
I strongly agree. I still think this is going to be the most powerful late game comp, Trophy Hunter notwithstanding. I think fundamentally you're going to need to find something different to do in the mid game, and that's good. That gives you more decision points. And it means more copycats are going to be in the shop when you need them as well. People haven't taken them to just randomly put them in front of some friendly spirits while they wait for good boys, because they weren't good enough stats at that point. So instead, you're able to take them and gold them as Waddle, take them and have one in your bench going into tier 6, so you're ready for that pivot.
Yeah, I think, that's what I have to say about copycat. Unit's still good, but worse.
Our other nerf is a tiny change to Apocalypse. They've taken it from 50 health down to 45 health. This seems odd to me as I wasn't that high on Apocalypse, but you were still pretty high on Apocalypse on ladder, right?
Oh yeah, Apocalypse I thought was for a while they were my best hero lifetime ever by a lot. They ended up coming down a little bit, but they were still easily I think they were maybe the third best hero, like A tier at least, pushing on that S. And the aggregate stat websites, I don't, not huge sample sizes or whatever, but they also had Apocalypse having completely insane stats. I think a 5 health change makes a lot of sense. The hero was very strong. 5 health can make quite a big difference to a hero, as we've seen with the 5 health increases. Your life total is a super valuable resource, and it definitely can be one full fight of surviving.
This is true, and I've definitely made it to tier 6 as Apocalypse on less than 5 health.
Yeah, absolutely.
That happens.
So yeah, I think a good change for Apocalypse. It was a very strong hero that could be brought down a peg. Still probably unplayable in tournaments. We'll talk about that a little bit closer to the next tournament. We'll do a tournament meta and how it's different kind of breakdown. But yeah, as a hero that doesn't do anything for a long time, it's a rough one in tournaments. But good enough for ladder, because you do get that late game strength and you can just crush a lobby once you're tier 6.
Agreed. It's a huge power spike as Apocalypse, as we know. I've put down 3 lateral changes, all to evil units in the mid game, but you've mentioned a couple of these are nerfs, and you're not wrong. They're basically nerfs. Do you want to talk us through these 3?
Yeah, so the first 2, Chupacabra and Shadow Assassin, are mostly just a Slay rework. So Chupacabra now gives +2/+0 to itself and the units behind it, and Shadow Assassin is now a 2/4 that gains only power and no toughness. So what the goal of this is to stop you having mid-game units that scale to be unbeatable. Like, it was not uncommon for you to have a 200-200 Chupacabra with 2 100-100 ranged units behind it. And, because of Grimsoul allowing you to double, triple, quadruple down on this effect, you could be getting just a ton of stats, even if you weren't slaying. That was the thing with Chupacabra, is that even if you were like, well, this Chupacabra is never going to get to attack, yeah, I've got 4 Grimsoul triggers and 2 Baba Yagas, so it gets +6, it's 18/18 of stats even before it attacks.
Yeah.
You can just add a ton of value off that sort of thing. Now, what you'll be left with, especially for the units behind the Chupacabra, is a bunch of high power, low toughness units. They'll be able to slay consistently. I think the Chupacabra will still get to the point where when it attacks, it will be getting that slay trigger, probably even more consistently. But having a 35-5 in your front row is nothing late game.
Yeah.
And, even 100-5, a very reasonable stat for a Chupacabra to get with. You can't do anything without any toughness.
No. It's only ever going to trade 1-for-1. It's like the old-fashioned trees comps, right? Where everything gains a ton of power off the Ashwood, and then everything's trading 1-for-1. Oh, we're just tying until they find a Pigamorph or some ranged units to break through.
Yeah. And then even behind it, you'll have Baba Yagas with 100 attack as well. That's still not enough for you to be excited. You've had to commit really hard to a strategy that doesn't give you dominating force. Shadow Assassin in particular, I think, is now just kind of a bad unit. A ranged unit. It's now basically Spellweaver. I think it's very similar to Spellweaver in terms of both the stats it gains and its stats. And Spellweaver's probably the worst 3-drop. A high attack range unit is really cool. It's definitely a thing you can do. Put it in slot 1, it probably gets a 2-for-1, but it's not a late game strategy, and it's not Shadow Assassin was your cornerstone, and that's kind of gone. I think Bad Moon is the way you can make up for this. Certainly on Chupacabra, it's a way for it to get health, but doesn't solve the problems. Chupacabra that itself will then be a massive unit. Now it's getting +3/+2 every slay. Sweet. And the units behind it, still just power. I think that because
well, the units behind it are ranged, right? The Baba Yagas are ranged and getting power on them. You're sort of doubling down on that stat if it gets to attack. The Shadow Assassins are ranged. Even in the mid-game, the Sporkos are ranged, right?
It's a thing you can do, but you probably need the treasures, and I think on the whole, I'm not slam picking Chupacabra on 4.0.
I say Sporko, are we meant to be taking Lady of the Lake now as Slay?
Maybe, I can definitely believe that. But yeah, no, I think I think Slay's in a bad place, and I'm still pretty actively avoiding Slay.
I'm excited to try Slay with Bad Moons, but I'm not convinced it's going to be powerful.
The other lateral change, I suppose, which I think is mostly on the buff side, is Monster Book. So they brought Monster Book down from a tier 5 unit to a tier 4 unit, and they've changed it from a 10-4 to a 7-4, is that correct?
I think it's a 7-3.
So Monster Book has gone from a 10-4 to a 7-3. The other thing, the kind of hidden change to Monster Book, is that it casts from spells based on your level. So when you buy it on tier 4, it isn't able to cast some of the spells that it historically could, like Poison Apple and Shrivel. It will eventually be able to do that when you hit tier 5, and, when you hit tier 6, it'll be able to cast the really good spells, Smite and Pigamorph. Be aware that it can't cast those immediately when you buy it. It's still a really good unit. I like it a lot more in the slot. It was basically unplayable at tier 5. It's now an on-ramp for mages to some extent. You can get an Animal Familiar scaling a little earlier. You can get some triggers on a Spellweaver a little earlier. I think it's also a good thing to be doing on people like Trophy Hunter or anyone else who can do some, or Muerte, get some extra value out of those last breaths. A good unit that has enough power that it often trades and then gets a little bit of value. A solid mid-game unit in a way that it wasn't before.
Trophy Hunter Monster Book sounds great. Yeah, Trophy Hunter Monster Book Mages is something I want to try out. Part of the problem I have with this change is the level 4 spells are quite bad, so trying to reevaluate that in my head when I look at a Monster Book, that this isn't going to be casting a bunch of Shrivels, is hard to get used to. And if I'm trying to on-ramp into mages, I've already got Sporko and Lady of the Lake. I don't need another 4-drop doing something for me. What I need is 5 drops to maximize the chances that I get 9th book.
I hated buying Monster Book as mages on tier 5. Like, yes, it was a way to get 9th book, and that was the thing I really wanted to do. But once you had it, it was trash. Yeah, I agree that might be a problem, but, you can find your Moonsong Horn off it. I think you'll be okay. Your Forking Rod.
That's true. Forking Rod is sweet.
I forgot to talk about Forking Rod as Sphinx. It's super good.
Yeah, it's okay. We've said it now, and you know what? That makes a lot of sense to me, because when anything's free, you can get 2 copies of Wish Upon a Star. Oh god, that's gross.
Cool. That's Monster Book covered. And now we've got a few buffs. Most of these are relatively marginal, but a few of them worth mentioning. So Lancelot got +2/+2. Lancelot sucked. Lancelot was truly awful. This doesn't change that a huge amount.
Yeah, this doesn't impact the amount I'm taking Lancelot very much.
You're slightly more likely to find those boards where you have Sporko, Sting, and Lancelot instantly flips.
But we're still doing the same thing. We're not sitting behind a Lancelot hoping it slays 5 times.
No.
We're hoping we see a Queen's Grace along with a treasure that insta-flips it.
Yes. So Lancelot is the last remaining toughness scaling Slay unit. Vainpire exists but doesn't scale enough. Lancelot can still do the Slay thing, be a 200/200. You need to have kind of both have the infrastructure in place and instantly pivot in on it. The stars have to align to some extent. But when they do, you can do some stuff with Lancelot. Once it gets +4/+4 Slay, Baba Yaga Grimsoul scales that real fast.
If your gold Polly turns into a gold Lancelot, go for it.
Yeah, sure. Next up, Riverwish Mermaid. She went from a 4/4 to a 4/8. I have probably overreacted to this change, if I'm honest. I've been taking a whole bunch of mermaids.
How's that working out for you?
She's not very different, if I'm honest. Yeah, the unit's better. You still need to have a bunch of synergies with it, either an early Bad Moon or something else. I do think she's a little better for Miri now. Miri was not interested in Riverwish even as a princess. I would now take it on Miri because it's a slightly better unit with some inbuilt scaling on units that you were going to have hang around. I'm going to take it in my Arthur comps more.
Yeah, getting a +1/+1 on your Juliet, you can double down on that. That's okay.
Certainly on 4.0, Riverwish Mermaid is now kind of in that Heartwood Elder slot of some scaling and some decent stats. Way bigger than all the 3-drops, so I can take it on 4.0 to find some power in a way that previously, take it on 4.0 was a death sentence. Like, what are you doing?
I was thinking of it still as much worse than Heartwood Elder, but you think that's actually quite close?
No, it's still significantly worse than Heartwood Elder. It's both. Slay is significantly worse than just get the stats at the start of the fight. Yeah, no, there's no way it's as good as Heartwood Elder, but it's in that I'm on 4.0, I need to find my tier 3 didn't go that well, I need to find some powerful units to stabilize with. Riverwish Mermaid can function as some high stats if that's what you desperately need.
That makes a lot of sense.
Next, we have Pump King. This is a couple of changes to Pump King. First of all, it doubled its stats. It's always good to pick a unit to double its stats, and they went with Pumpkin this patch. The Great Pumpkin King went from a 5/5 to a 10/10. This doesn't make much difference. Mostly, this stops it getting sniped. Like, as a 10/10, it still dies to vanilla lightning dragons and to lightning bolts, but it means you're more likely to be able to get it above those ranges with a little bit of effort. Whether that's a power orb, which is the kind of treasure I really want on pumpkins. A monkey's paw means it now is instantly on a level, big enough that it doesn't die to those things. It needs that little bit of extra effort. I think 10/10 is a perfect number to put it at, where you can still feel like lightning bolt dragon can be a counter, but they can counter your counter. I really like it at 10/10.
Yes, it gives some new interaction to that.
Yeah. The other change is that it is now able to summon 1/1 cats if a level 2 character died. So previously, this wouldn't come up a huge amount, but if you were transitioning into evils from a evil queen comp or something, you might still have a black cat or a mad mim triple that have just been sitting on your board doing fine work. And the fact they didn't actually work with Pumpkin at all was surprisingly awkward. Now, at least you get something. And if you're Pumpkins, you probably have, again, you really have to hope you have a treasure, a Ring of Rage, a Monkey's Paw, something that means that is more than a 1/1. But yeah, or, even Ancient Sarcophagus. An extra trigger of Ancient Sarcophagus can be huge, and that's often a treasure that leads me in this direction.
Yeah, it's about getting more from that 1/1 than just a 1/1, obviously.
You're not going to have any tier 2 units in your final Pumpkin comps, but it makes the on-ramp to Pumpkin a little easier. Yeah, not a huge change, but nice to see.
I wanted to quickly check a small exception to this. I think I've got one, but it's tiny. If you're Beauty, you might have managed to transition a trees into a pumpkin and have this enormous happy little tree that you're still fine with in your comp.
Sure. Beauty is one of the people who I was consistently going for Pumpkin on, and Pumpkin was kind of bad. Now it might be better. Fine. Next up, we have 3 heroes who have changed. First of all, Morgan Le Fay and Beauty gained 5 health. Not the heroes I would necessarily have given 5 health to.
Hashtag give Fates 5 health.
Look, Fates needs it. Morgan, I don't love it as a change. It feels like, part of the joke of Morgan is that your health is a resource. And, you are okay with losing Smiley fights, and now just kind of having more of that feels like you should just be playing almost like Apocalypse and Grandma, aggressively buy those XP spells, and then get a high tier treasure.
Yeah, you're going to lose eventually, and then you get a 5 or a 6 drop treasure. You feel really strong. Yeah. It also increases the chances that when you dip to 20 or just below 20, you've already got access to healing potions and things to put you back up above and double dip on Morgan, which is the thing we most want to do.
I do love double dipping for sure. Yeah. I've played one game with Morgan and she felt really good. I think it's a big but. Morgan Le Fay definitely benefits more than any other hero from gaining 5 health because the turn you hit 20 versus 25 is huge. It makes a massive difference for that interval. You're way less likely to somehow free fall into a tier 3 treasure or something, which was terrible.
Their health was already such a resource to them. It'd be like giving Cursed King 5 health, except much better.
Yeah, that would be crazy. Yeah.
The final thing to say about this is that there's diminishing returns on keeping adding 5 health to the worst heroes in the game, right? Like, sooner or later it might feel like a nerf for a hero to only start with 40 health. If that becomes half the heroes in the game.
Yes, and it definitely, they can't keep doing this forever. Yeah, I guess. And then finally we have a skip change, which is a little hard to evaluate on the surface, but having done the math, or having watched someone else do the math, it seems like a pretty positive change. So the skip change is that now the first shop you see, not the tier 2 shop, the tier 3 shop you'll be offered on the start of turn 2, will be all level 3 characters. I think this happens even if you lock the shop of tier 2 treasures. They are replaced with all tier 3s. It's a bit weird.
Oh no, my Cinderella Forbidden Fruit Lonely Prince shop. I think that's the nut one. I'm not sure. My triple egg shop.
I've just heard rumors of this. I haven't seen it for myself. Yes, I have heard that will happen. Regardless, someone did the math. They categorized these are the good hits, these are the medium hits. It's like 83% to get a good hit and like 96 or something to get at least a medium hit. There aren't that many misses on tier 3. There definitely are some, but there aren't enough that you're going to be offered all bad units, all units that are just kind of unacceptable to start with, like Darkwood Creeper or Spellweaver, or Shadow Assassin's probably fine on that turn. Like Sleeping Princess, no way to wake it up, right? Darkwood Creeper, Sleeping Princess, Spellweaver, these are like the really unacceptable. You're still going to lose that fight kind of things. Now you're much more likely to get a unit that rapidly stabilizes you. You're much more likely to find the high hits, like Lucky, like Prize Pig, like Brave Princess, that can really get you off to a flying start. I guess doubly's the other miss. Yeah, you're much less likely to get those misses, way more likely to be offered something good, and that's huge. I still like this a little less than the very decision-heavy locking decision we used to get as Skip. I thought that was a really fun aspect of the game where you could find the line where you were happy to lock, but overall, Skip was not okay. He was too strong. He is now probably back in line as an interesting hero. I think he'll probably be pretty good, and that's cool. Not an elegant change, but a one I like.
It's interesting that they went with this instead of just saying, oh, well, you start at 3.0, but you don't gain XP for round 1 or something, which would be the same, you're 2 XP ahead of the lobby, but you have that locking decision. It does lower the RNG as well, because you can no longer still roll a shop of all 2s as Skip, which you mentioned had happened on the previous patch.
Yeah, and finally, the 2 things that have just gone from this patch. Broccoli, not mentioned in the patch notes, but has been removed. Oh no, they did eventually add it to the patch notes, there we go. Yeah, having moved some units around, adding Grimsoul back, moving Monster Book down to tier 4. Tier 4 was overly full. Removing Broccoli is okay. It definitely makes Heartwood Elder. I very frequently bought Heartwood Elder with no trees because there were 3 tier 4 trees that I was happy to pick up. Saltic Ancient, Nutcracker, Broccoli, and with one less, that speculative Heartwood Elder is less exciting than it was. I'm not going to stop doing it. You can't make me. But yeah, it's definitely worse. But Broccoli was a sensible cut. It was one of those units that was crazy if you got it on tier 3 somehow, just on 4.0, and then but even by 4.2 was just like complete trash. Units like that are often relatively unhealthy for game. They massively reward acceleration, but also are unplayable for most of the game. Not a great unit to have.
Not long for the world. Increases the value of picking up Happy Little Trees early. If we want to make that Heartwood transition on 4, actually, if you've got a Mim so that your Happy Little Tree isn't embarrassing on the first few turns of the game.
Or a hero power, but yeah.
Yes, yeah. Fallen Angel or whatever. I would love to see a version of Broccoli at tier 3. Tier 3 only has 1 tree, and it's terrible. Obviously not with these stats. That would be nonsense.
Yeah. I could see it as like a donkey sort of unit, right? This kind of massively punishes people who have lots of low attack units.
Yeah, exactly.
And finally, they also removed Exploding Mittens. Exploding Mittens was a really interesting treasure in that it was super risky and super counterable. If you know you're facing someone with like Mimic Mittens, a back row Angry just beats their whole comp sometimes in a way that was kind of surreal.
I mean, I've been hatball against a Pumpkin Mittens thing and just had one random Angry in my comp and been like, yeah, beat this.
Yeah. Mittens always felt like a kind of a feel-bad treasure. Sometimes you faced against someone who was on Darkwood Creeper and all you did was win them the game. It was really powerful, but often felt kind of gross and was probably feels bad. The reason they actually cut it was that its animations were too long. Which is also very valid. If you had Mittens Mimic versus a Darkwood Creeper, fights lasted 100 hours, and I'm glad that's gone to that extent. I don't think changing the tier 5 treasure pool makes an overall difference to any strategies, but there are only 11 treasures there. Do with that what you will. Maybe makes early Mice on Horde Dragon slightly worse, because early Mittens was dumb, but I don't think you should overreact to that change.
Mittens was also one of our hits for a treasure map into 3-drop on Peter Pants.
That's true.
Because it did a lot of work early, as you're saying. Finally, they have completely overhauled the Dwarves archetype, or the Dwarfs archetype, whichever you prefer. So, in terms of nerfs, they've taken Lordy, and they've stopped it affecting your Princess White. This takes us back to where we were a couple of months ago, with it being a bit awkward whether you want to still run the Princess White, or just replace her with the Lordy. But it was really clunky text, is why they did this. I think that makes a lot of sense. They've changed Princess White a lot. So she now functions a lot closer to Bossy. She's just a Dwarf's Lord when she comes down, and if you complete her quest, same quest of buying 7, she will double that buff that she's giving the rest of the team, from +1/+1 to +2/+2, and then she'll just become a 4/8. She's no longer growing in size, she's no longer a 20/20 dominating the board. Crafty, they've given you more stats up front, but less stats for each treasure. So Crafty's starting off as a 2/2. It's no longer embarrassing on that first turn of the game, but it's only getting +2/+2 for each treasure. So it's no longer the Golden Crafty is going to be that 20/20 dominating the mid game. They've said out loud they don't want dwarves to be just this all-in, my units are so much bigger than the competition in the middle of the game. And Tweedledee, one of the most interesting changes to any of the characters, has gone from being a 3-drop to a 4-drop, and is now a 6/1 with Last Breath, Summon Tweedledum with my attack and health swapped. So any buffs that you get on the Tweedledee, you get the swap on the Tweedledum. And if you get it gold, like with a Wombat, you're getting those stats twice. So it's swapped and then doubled. Finally, the only all-out buff that they gave to dwarves was Angry. Angry, as we've said before on the cast, is embarrassing at a 410, much like Lancelot. It's just too small. They've changed it to a 515. That +1 power, it's not really relevant. Might change a couple of breakpoints against like some pigs or what have you. But 15 toughness means it's now surviving hits from sirens. It's very likely to survive its first hit on like 5.0. And then it's giving your whole team +2/+2, including itself, and that's a meaningful change. They've also, because Princess White is the new Bossy, cut Bossy completely. So you can no longer get the 4-drop Dwarf's Lord. I haven't had a chance to play with these new dwarves yet. Normally the dwarves guy on this podcast. What do we make of this suite of changes? How's this playing out?
Overall, I think this is a nerf for dwarves, mostly because I don't really see the on-ramp anymore. Previously, one of the ways you became dwarves was you saw a Princess White in a shop with another dwarf and went, okay, cool, this is a direction, she's going to be a 3/5 or a 4/6, and I can rely on her power while I get this kind of dwarf synergy thing going, and then I have a very strong mid-game that I can hopefully find Dwarven Forge, whatever. Now, I think the only way that I even start taking dwarves is with like a Fanny pair on tier 2. Like, it's really hard to see myself wanting to move towards dwarves. Otherwise, Princess White on her own is a bad unit unless you have like 6 other dwarves, and even then she's not that exciting. But you want to take her first so she can complete her quest. It's a really awkward unit that doesn't slot in very well and makes it relatively difficult for me to see a way that I become dwarves. Once I get there, I think they're fine. I think they might even be better because Tweedledee is so busted, like makes Lordy much stronger. I think Tweedledee in general is a very strong unit. Maybe that's the on-ramp, is that Tweedledee's really good, but that doesn't feel real to some extent.
We play like some supports and then get a Tweedledee down and then a Dwarven Forge and never bother with Princess White stuff.
Like Tweedledee in front of a Sporko or whatever, he gets to triple down on the Sporko buff because not only the power he had then becomes extra toughness, and then the Tweedledum also then gets the power again. Like, that interaction is very strong.
It's like having another doubly, right?
Yeah, it's like an extra doubly, absolutely. And maybe that's maybe Sting or whatever is meant to be the on-ramp to dwarves. I don't know. I don't really see it. Tweedledee is a super cool unit, bunch of really fun stuff you can do. I think keep an eye out for it, even if you're not dwarves. How do you become dwarves? I have not figured that out. But I have lost to some dwarves players. I have seen the Lordy stuff be really good. I've seen Tweedledees. Maybe it is just Tweedledees into Lordies. Angries are better, but I don't know how I become it. I can't see myself buying Princess White early.
It's definitely powerful if you can put it together.
But I just don't see how.
Finding the on-ramp. They might not be there very often. Like, they've reduced the number of dwarves in the game by 1, right? They haven't introduced a new dwarf.
Yeah. Crafty, also worth mentioning. Crafty going from a 1/1 to a 2/2 makes Kitty Cutpurse and Pollywoggle in the early game slightly worse. There are now a meaningful, like, it's now very, very difficult to be offered a shop of all 1/1s, and you're much less likely to see like a speculative Crafty pair, and so take a Crafty on turn 1. I mean, you're just as likely to do that. It's even better, but you're less likely to face an opponent who has done that, and so you might get a Pollywoggle Slay. I don't think that makes a huge difference. I wasn't picking Pollywoggle or Kitty Cutpurse very often on tier 1 anyway.
And I don't think the people at the top lobbies are taking Crafty on tier 1 anyway, right? Like, it's hard for me to picture the shop of all 1/1. If there's a pair, I guess, but the shop of all 1/1s from which I'm taking the Crafty is few and far between.
Now it's a 2/2, which means something like a Fanny Crafty start is like legitimately very good. I think maybe that's the on-ramp, but once I've got Fanny Crafty, I wouldn't go, ooh, cool, let's get Princess White. I'll go, cool, let's do anything else. Like, yeah, I don't know. I don't really see how to make that come together.
Why get Princess White when you can get Strong? Cool, that's the end of the patch notes. How do you feel about this patch overall?
Yeah, I'm excited. New heroes are fun to play around with. I like that I can bring back Grimsoul Polywoggle shenanigans. They were some of my favourite interactions in the game. Nothing massively changing. I was hoping perhaps for a little bit more of a meta shake-up, but three new heroes and some other changes make me interested. So yeah, cool, excited. Look forward to playing it more. Obviously, we've only barely dipped our toes in so far.
Agreed. I'm looking forward to, over the holidays, ignoring my family and grinding out the storybook for all. That sounds like lots of fun. I'm prepared to call that a show. That's our show. Thank you so much for listening. You can find us on the Discord. I'm Jethro. He's Sythesys. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at 7th Tier Podcast, the number 7, the word podcast. You can also find Syth Stream on twitch.tv/SYTHESYS, where we're recording these live. We'll be back in the new year with the same content, but we'll be saying different words. Until then, don't forget, having 4 golden units by 4.0 is completely reasonable. Have a great week.